The Secret Science by Henri Durville. Chapter 1. The Secret Science. Man's preoccupation with knowing the mysteries of his essence and his destiny is not recent. Naturally, these mysteries which, in the youth of humanity, outnumber the others, do not interest rudimentary intelligences, but the inspired, the wise, seek to find these truths in the hope of immediately communicating them to their poor brothers and of hastening their evolution. As far back as we can go in history, we see these thinkers renouncing the noisy life. They are withdrawn from the world and, in a calm favorable to meditation, they resolve to overcome contingencies, the vain human agitations, in order to meditate on real life, to ascend beyond effects and causes. The first of these thinkers ceased to surrender to the forces that dominated them. They sought to know these forces, to divine their origin, to dominate them as much as possible. They recognized that these forces obey a rhythm, which they studied in its manifestations in multiple appearances. They find themselves in the presence of laws that they are compelled to penetrate. They know the secret of these laws and these rhythms. They seek and discover the secret of life, of a beautiful, happy, and harmonious life. The purpose that they find in human life is evolution. But what is this evolution? What are we ourselves? Where did we come from, and to what end do our efforts tend? Where do our destinies lead us? If it is, as we know it to be in all initiations, for personal perfection, can we not hasten this perfection? Can we not acquire these wonderful powers, these almost unknown faculties in which the words initiate and initiation are always present, opening to us the doors of unknown worlds that truth illuminates with a marvelous sun? To this question, the sages of all ages respond affirmatively. They study the forces of human nature and penetrate the secret of the nature of the forces that surround us, which are perceptible within us and all around us. They taught us the possession and direction of forces, so that they may be used for our best evolution. They taught us to direct these forces instead of being subjected to them, or at least to make use of their direction as the rider makes use of his horse, even though the latter is stronger than he. Through this knowledge, they demonstrated to us that we could be masters of ourselves and that we could also possess other powers. They taught us to achieve the marvelous equilibrium of heart, spirit, and body that unites us with this absolute rhythm that directs the worlds. From the effects, which everyone recognizes and which fall under our senses, these innovators, these champions of human thought are led to the causes. They reveal to us the reasons for the inequality of human conditions and for all the bitternesses, for all the sufferings. They bring us the secret that gives joy to the heart, and with it, the full blooming of the spirit, the sovereign calm, the appeasement of the yearning, of the restlessness that is the pinnacle of strength. They lead us, these sages of all times, to the summits where the light blossoms in flames and in vibrations more beautiful than music and poetry. These are the ones who make us understand that we are subject to those mutable cycles which animate, from transformation to transformation, along the path of pain, reflection, and work, toward a better condition of thought, toward those states which we nurture with the most ardent aspiration, even before obtaining them. The goal of so much work is a better, more ardent, and more perfect knowledge of ourselves. It is a more intimate communion with this unknown and sensible world in which we are bathed. To be raised to such a height, we must perfect our spirit, purify our heart, strip ourselves of every egoistic, narrow, and petty sentiment to embrace the solidarity of other beings, this altruism which is the most beautiful form of our sentiments. Such is the goal of our life, and all the sages teach us this, whether clearly or under the mutable veil of images and myths. Only by approaching them can we understand all the beauty of the goal offered to our efforts. Some wonder why these thinkers have not presented the totality of their knowledge in a form accessible to everyone. It must be said that the difficulty of the times did not always allow them to deliver to all, as they wished, the entirety of their work. It was not possible for them to offer it to everyone in an accessible form. Not all beings are in a state to withstand this revelation. A preparation is necessary, for brains that believe themselves very strong have lost their calm in the presence of these new, almost unlimited powers, of these unexpected means of perception and knowledge. Others have not fulfilled the hopes they had inspired. They saw in these revelations possibilities of profit, satisfactions of vanity, and means of domination entirely incompatible with the high ideal that must be born from such studies. All these investigators, whose thought still illuminates the undefined field of knowledge, all these guides of our evolution, each of whom has presided over a phase of our civilization, Fohi, Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Hermes, Moses, Orpheus, Pythagoras, Plato, Jesus, all left teachings and a tradition appropriate to the needs of their time, which we must know and from which we must draw benefit for our moral orientation. Their action, the memory of which we have preserved, and the moral directions that they were moved to leave to their schools, which form the treasure of our notions, are our precious heritage. The truth that they have enriched and proclaimed, they have adapted to their era, to the mentality of those who listen to them, but we cannot yet utilize it effectively. All these sages glimpsed the problem. Through different paths they walked toward the light. They have all sought means to hasten the individual and social evolution of beings and of races. All have recognized the need to elevate the being above matter, to direct it toward the heights, to guide its spirit, to open its heart and its soul to all this beauty, to the divine rhythms that sustain us and make us understand what the world would be like if we had a purer conception of its reality. This marvelous action they accomplished according to the elements at their disposal, according to the probabilities of their time. All these sages recognized that the human being, still too attached to matter, was not ready to receive the integral knowledge of the truth. If this absolute truth were known and obeyed by all, profound and unexpected changes would take place in the universe. Social life would be built on a different foundation. Social relations would be modified, and the goods to be acquired would be contested on very different ground from that on which our time animates the formidable struggle for life. Then, knowledge, intelligence, goodness, and psychic powers would be the true wealth, and every more highly evolved being would enjoy immense powers, the mere thought of which plunges us into abysses of admiration. However, the world is far from being ready for this complete unfolding. Therefore, it will be as dangerous and illogical to give explosives to a child as it would be imprudent to give or entrust secrets to those who are not in a state to understand them. One day, the child will be a man and will be able to use the terrible explosives for useful work. In the same way, peoples will one day understand the true goal of life, becoming capable of being initiated. The sanctuary of knowledge will then be open to all. Long centuries of waiting are still necessary. The mastery of this knowledge does not admit revolution, but a continuous evolution. Every revolution destroys and evolution builds. This construction, which the centuries have begun, must be carried out normally, slowly, without sudden flashes and without pauses. Sages and initiates of all ages, in all domains, have offered a twofold teaching. One, an exoteric teaching intended for the multitude, not considered as an insurmountable caste, but as the entirety of those of whatever order, who are not in a position to guide themselves and to suddenly attain knowledge. This teaching could, therefore, only be of a moral nature, better regulating the forces and feelings of each individual. Hence, we see the myths, the rites, and the symbols, whose purpose has been to veil, in the most beautiful and harmonious form, the teachings that were not imparted to all. Unveiling the results of the profound and secret cause of these forms and myths at this time, therefore, would be even more dangerous than useless. 2. An esoteric teaching. Here, there are further mysteries and an almost full and complete revelation of the deepest secrets. This initiation was always reserved for an elite, prepared long in advance for the teaching. Before entrusting them with this science, it was ensured that the future adept possessed the required qualities, that his judgment be upright, that his heart be firm, an enemy of matter, and shielded from all covetous aims. It was verified that his heart possessed elevated feelings, that he was capable of taking an interest in the common good, in truth, and in a high ideal to which he was ready to sacrifice everything, even himself, that he possessed, in reality, the sincere desire to elevate himself, to acquire a fraternal and reliable guide. Everywhere, within initiatory, philosophical, and religious currents, alongside the exoteric teaching, whose outward form often still strikes us by its beauty or by the strange appearances that cloak hidden interpretations, we find an initiatory part that is the apogee and the crowning achievement. This fact holds true in Egypt as in India and Persia, as well as in ancient Greece. Christianity, like all religions, possessed in its beginning its initiatory tradition, best revealed by St. John in his Gospel and, above all, in the mysterious figures of the Apocalypse. This tradition was subsequently condemned for bringing causes of disturbance into the Church. But traces of it can be found in all the Gnostic initiations that succeeded the early Church, up to our present day. In the same way, Islam possesses its esoteric tradition in Sufism. The exoteric part is naturally the best-known aspect of philosophies and religions. In them, the exterior and artistic beauties of the most magnificent flowering stand out. It is by basing oneself upon the exoteric teaching, in which the masters of all ages summarize their thoughts in forms accessible to the multitude, that one has imagined the existence of irreconcilable divergences between religions and initiations. The reality is that, in this part of the revelation, the sages were forced to take into account all sorts of contingencies. They had to adapt themselves to the times in which they lived, to the customs that depended upon the state of civilization in that era, and to the tendencies that flourished at that moment in our history. Whatever the unity of a doctrine may be, it cannot be presented in the same form to a Hindu and to a European, whose mentalities are vastly different. On the other hand, natural forms do not present themselves in the same manner everywhere. Visible beauty is different everywhere. If the Egyptians employed the papyrus and the lotus, the Greeks the acanthus, and the Europeans the fleur-de-lis, the clover, and other native plants, it is because they drew these models for their creations from the surrounding nature. The same applies concerning thought. It is presented in the form most accessible to those who are meant to understand. It has been adorned with all the magic of form and word, which has not occurred without some modification. But, beneath its mutable appearances, the thought has remained the same. Goodness, virtue, and selflessness are the foundation of this direction toward the improvement of the soul. This improvement cannot be achieved without knowing the cause, and our first duty is to penetrate this knowledge of being, of our personal being, initially. Then, through study and analogy, which is the key to many sciences, the knowledge of nature and of spirit, from inanimate forms and the first palpitations of organic life, up to pure spirit, up to God. As for the esoteric teaching, it has remained in a fragmentary condition in what religions and literatures have left us concerning the ancient initiations. The fact that this teaching was secret prevented a diffusion that would have better preserved it for us. The closest to us among these mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries, are only noted in the form of allusions by the Greek dramatists. Even Euripides incurred reproaches for having spoken more openly than was customary. He was not an initiate of a very high order. Therefore, in order to transmit the acquired truths without allowing them to be penetrated by those who lacked the qualities to be admitted, it was necessary to remain within the realm of myths and symbols. It is cited that a Pythagorean, at a time when the entire order was undergoing persecution, being unable to pay his innkeeper in full, left him, with the formal promise of a prompt settlement, a geometric drawing that was to remain on display. The innkeeper trusted his guest and placed the drawing in plain sight. Many travelers passed by who did not see the drawing and gave it no importance. But a Pythagorean came in turn, saw the image, inquired how it had come to be in the house, and, upon learning that the author had left it in payment of a prior debt, paid the sum so that the drawing would immediately disappear. These symbols, these myths, were admirable in every respect, but one needed to have the key to understand them. This key eluded all researchers. We therefore have the task of gathering some of these scattered elements from all sides. On the other hand, due to their nature, these symbols were subject to many interpretations, sometimes contradictory ones. The initiatory explanation was only transmitted orally, under the seal of the most profound secrecy. Thus, as long as the Pythagoreans, whom we cite because their example is famous, had the freedom to meet, their tradition remained intact. But when persecution arose, no one could master the teaching given. Many precious indications have emerged from these facts, and we possess only a portion of the oral tradition, still needing to coordinate it with logic and supplement it through deduction and the study of the missing parts. We are left with what the symbols provide, what the sacred books, the votive inscriptions, and those painted or sculpted symbols offer. Here, in the presence of material facts that are more easily mastered, the work is less arduous, especially since archaeologists have, voluntarily or involuntarily, contributed their share of discoveries to the research of the initiate. A patient investigation and the gathering of many scattered elements are still necessary to arrive at this truth, which is the goal we seek. All these religions, all these philosophies, beneath the multiplicity of rites and symbols, offer to those who observe them, even with the eyes of a curious onlooker, a tourist of the ideal, unexpected vistas, a marvelous panorama that attracts and captivates the gaze, plunging thought into the abyss of meditation. He who stumbles upon these studies by chance, provided he is capable of extracting some benefit from the subject, makes the most singular verifications every day. These give his mind the vertigo of the infinite, enchanting his heart with the vivid splendor of the chants and images and, above all, with the magnitude of the lessons imparted to him. This marvelous path is not, however, without its difficulties. It would be letting oneself be carried away by vain hopes to imagine that access to the domain of wisdom can be immediate and absolute for the human being, even for one who is well endowed. A long preparation is required. The first stage of this part of our evolution is the liberation from all the ideas we were in the habit of nurturing and which, before being adopted by us, should have been subjected to a perfectly critical examination on our part. Our critical sense was perhaps not so strongly enlightened at the moment we undertook our intellectual formation. It is necessary, therefore, according to Descartes' expression, to make a tabula rasa of our preceding acquisitions and to restart our entire commenced inner life, as if we were children eager to learn, but subjected to this master which is for us the commenced initiation, the truth with which we ought to be in perfect harmony. This thought should not seem overly painful to us. In any case, its usefulness is imposed. The accepted prejudices give the panorama of knowledge we acquire a color that is not that of reality. It is not until the moment we acquire, through our own effort, an impartial and absolutely objective spirit that truth appears to us in all its marvelous entirety. Then what seemed absolute to us is unique. It draws closer to other facts that we had not perceived. The bond of all religions, the similarity of all rites, the unity of their teaching lead us to an evident truth. The diversity of dogmas is not enough to veil the marvelous beauty of this hidden unity which appeared to us as a separation between men. It becomes one more bond for them, a new reason to experience the most fraternal love. This is what Burnouf excellently expresses, saying, "All science, that of religions even more than the others, requires a free spirit, detached from preconceived ideas. As it addresses the Brahmin in India and the Buddhist in Siam or in China, as much as the Christian in Europe, there is, therefore, every need for each to keep their faith in their own heart and allow their intelligence to follow the paths that reason opens to it, which are neither less safe nor less mandatory than those of faith." This conception of a single religion, varied only by the prescriptions and rites appropriate to the needs of each race and each people, forbids all hatred and all sectarianism. He who is elevated to this truth loves all men, because all religions tend toward the same God. Burnouf luminously demonstrated this unity of religions. There is, he says, in religions a fundamental idea, which must be kept ceaselessly present in the mind when traversing the facts established by linguistics and archaeology, because this idea will provide the interpretation of the facts. Science then ceases to be pure analysis and takes its place in the order of the physiological sciences. This idea, which corresponds to life in physiology, animal or vegetable, is no longer a mystery today. It can be read, enunciated 100 times in simple terms in the Vedas. Then, once it has been grasped, it is found everywhere in the religions of later times. It animates the ceremonies of the cult, hides beneath the symbols, gives its meanings to dogmatic expressions. Its meanings, its direction, and its unity, spreading finally into moral doctrines, into practices and consequences of all kinds, of which the genius of the peoples and the nature of the environments are enough to explain the diversity. Rising to these heights, one perceives a kind of perfect harmony in this unity of religions. One finds this unity in all manifestations of the religious idea. The different formulas barely conceal this unity of the same truths, of the same tendencies. One no longer judges the tendencies of a people or a cult based on an isolated fact that would more or less disorient us, but rather, this strange fact is compared with others, similar to such a branch of the human family, and the bonds that tie them to the absolute, which is the need of all hearts, are discovered. Religion is a necessity for man, a necessity of the spirit. First of all, in a period of animism, man, marveling at the singular life that the dream awakens, discovered an immaterial part in himself, a part of which he had not yet known the cause. There is, more or less empirically, the recognition of the double, of the perispirit, of the soul, and some facts emerged that revealed to him the survival of these beings already detached from matter, and so they believed in this survival. They sought to assure themselves by all means and to win the favor of those they deemed to exist in another world, albeit invisible. Fetishism followed. Man realized that the immaterial part of his being is in solidarity with the other parts. One can, from this life on, operate upon the soul, disturb it, or sustain it. The result is a period where the lowest and most obscure magic reigns, the blackest sorcery. They fear, then, the evil influence of the dead. It is from this that the puerile and complicated material results in order to win the favor of the invisible powers, and also the objects that serve to ward off the hidden danger, to ensure their protection. Talismans, fetishes above all, which do not require great knowledge and are most often common and coarse objects, to which a strange power is attributed. This fetish, better carved, later becomes an idol that serves, sometimes, to evoke the spirit of the dead. Intelligence, developing, is not satisfied with these vain ideas, with these vain images. It rises to know the laws. It compares principles and effects. It recognizes the action of a being superior to men. It appeals to these unknown powers. It asks for everything that is necessary for this principle of societies. It is then that the abstract forces are revealed to it, and that, to understand them a little, it has personified them with all the resources of nascent art. Then, mythology is created, this personification of all forces that reaches its apogee in India as well as in Greece. These legends, transparent to the initiates, recount the abstract ideas or the cosmic phenomena that the poorly enlightened multitude could not grasp. For this multitude, the priests, the sages, the spiritual directors hide the truth under the harmonious veil of legend. They adorn it with the most beautiful forms, because they know that their thoughts were not accessible to those who were not initiated and who would, nevertheless, need to satisfy this appetite for the divine, which reigns in our heart. This was the realm of polytheism. It is a mistake to think that the enlightened spirits of these times believed in many gods. They knew well that a single thought, a single conscious law can direct the universe or the universes, but these images represented, in reality, ideas and natural forces, to which only the vulgar masses gave a personal existence. However, this apparent error could be perpetuated, and the people received, with the Semitic initiations, the consciousness of the true God, unique and perfect, who made that which governs the world. On the other hand, rites have their reason for being. Burnouf, in The Science of Religions, says very justly, "Religions constitute an act of adoration, and adoration is, at the same time, an intellectual act by which man recognizes a superior power and an act of love by which he cultivates his goodness. These acts are not abstractions and cannot explain scientific abstractions. They are realities of which man has been the author since ancient times. They are works that have not ceased to be fulfilled in eras of high civilization and in eras of barbarism and decadence. One must admit, in order not to accuse the entire human race of utter madness, that sacred formulas, as well as rites and symbols, cover something real, living, and permanent, which gives all religions their duration and their efficacy. It would also be absurd to imagine that the religious feeling could have been created by the incitement of just anyone. As we have said, there is a primordial need of humanity there, and it is found not only in all civilized phases but also in all the wildest times and countries. Even in moments when intellectuality has been at its most rudimentary, there is no people absolutely devoid of religiosity. The caveman drew religious scenes upon the bones of animals he himself had killed. Savages, from the most barbarous populations, always possess a crude cult, yet one to which they attach capital importance. It must therefore be admitted that the idea of God came into the world with humanity, and that man has embraced this idea ever since he was first surprised by his own capacity to think. He blended it with the sense of material needs, which he used to defend himself against the terrible beasts of antediluvian eras. He preoccupied himself with it at the same time he engaged in the struggle against hunger and cold. In the presence of such certain and general facts, it is necessary to admit that there are innate ideas within humanity, eternal ideas that it carries from its origin, which would perhaps reveal this origin to us if we were in a state to understand exactly as primitive humanity was able to understand. In the science of religions, Burnouf demonstrates that there is an eternal idea at the foundation of religion. The labor of the spirit that strives for elucidation constitutes science. The word that expresses it is the highest and most comprehensible of all words. It is the word, the verb, and the voice that enunciates this word expresses a sacred chant. This chant, this word, this science, this reason, this idea, this is the persistent element of all that exists. This element is, at the same time, the agent of life, the prime mover. All these gathered characteristics belong to the same epoch of a perfectly abstract state of being, yet one that can possess nothing individual in the human manner. Every science, every cult, every language calls it by a different name, but its true name is God, universal Father and author of life, Ahura, Brahma. This conception of God, Father and Creator, is that of the initiate. He is not bound by those myths and rites that have been created for those who have not followed the path of science. The initiate is above religion because, for him, the veils have fallen, all the veils that hid and disguised the idea. He reveres God directly, and all that is intermediary is completely useless to him. Like all human beings, the initiate has recognized the necessity of faith. But his faith is not the blind and stupid faith of the multitude. It is a conscious faith, based upon knowledge, which grows precisely from this knowledge to enter the domain of the intellect. The initiate does not deem it useful to close his eyes to see. He reasons upon the truths he accepts. His spirit possesses this synthesis of all religions, of all esotericisms, the alliance of science and faith. He perceives the necessity of a guiding thought for all our actions. He knows that life is not given to us without a cause and that it will not slip away by chance. He knows that no events will be fortuitous, that they will unfold according to a plan drawn by him, to which he strives ever more to adhere and conform his entire life, and that he has the right to attain the satisfactions, the promised realizations. The initiate is conscious that there exists a single God, creator of all things that he animates, from the stone to man. Nothing exists for him save in accordance with wise and just laws. But he also knows that this certainty has been perceived by all religions and translated by them in different ways. He knows that the variety of the path has led to the same light, this light that illuminates the spirit, all dogmas, and all symbols. He understands them, admires them as outpourings of the heart and conscience of humanity. He admires that unity of feelings and ideas which serves as the foundation for all religions and gives reason to all rites, just as the air vibrates in every chant and elevates them to heaven. The initiate, worthy of the name, places himself above, or rather, outside of all religions in their material form. He has absolutely no need for a cult to perceive the presence of God. The marvelous sight of nature suffices for him as a perfect temple, where he finds himself in perennial adoration. The initiate understands or divines what nature reveals to him. The rhythms she manifests, which are the evident proof of the conscious will that gave her life, appear to him everywhere. And it is within the bosom of nature, in communion with the rhythms that are her personal voice, that he best perceives the divine and unites with it through all the fervor of his feelings and his spirit. Every form of life is to him a subject of study. Every being reveals to him a fragment of divinity. He opens his heart to all things that evolve with all his love, with that infinite love which rises in the ascending degrees of his own evolution. In the initiatic centers, the initiate will find the same unity that appears to him in all religions. The rites, which have expressed absolute truths, share the same origin and are solely of a less material symbolism. All initiations have pursued the same end. All have offered the adept ever more numerous and perfect means to analyze himself, to perfect himself, to acquire virtues and knowledge, and to elevate himself to new divine summits. However, while religion addresses the multitude, seducing it with the beauty of its rites and moving it with the sweetness of its teachings, the initiatic centers reveal the pure truth and indicate an ascesis, permitting one to attain the highest peaks and to cross them more swiftly and securely. In the aforementioned groups, the teaching is not primarily theoretical and general, but essentially practical. And beyond being practical, it is personal. An initiatic center can only admit members who are already chosen, already almost initiated by their own research or by their lives, and who are ready to understand and assimilate what they are told for their higher evolution. The goal of all religions, like that of all initiatic centers, is essentially the same, despite the difference in means. Everywhere the aim is to detach the soul from matter to draw it closer to God. However, initiation provides the safest, swiftest, and most conscious means. In his commentaries on the golden verses of Pythagoras, Fabre d'Olivet tells us, all initiations, all mythological doctrines, tend only to free the soul from the weight of matter, to purify it, and to enlighten it through the irradiation of intelligence, so that, desirous of spiritual goods, it may cast itself out of the circle of generations to elevate itself to the source of its existence. The means of ascension to attain such a noble end are equally common to religions and to initiatic centers. They entail, above all, an exoteric part and, in the first place, the knowledge of oneself. Indeed, we can do nothing useful in traversing the initiatic path if we do not know our own being in itself and in its relations with God, with nature, and with humanity, upon which we depend and which is impacted by all our actions. We must next purify our body through a healthy and regular life, through a well-understood hygiene that will neither harm the spiritual part through overly animalistic joys, nor destroy the proper functioning of the organs through reckless privations. Guidance is useful to attain this golden mean. The spirit is in need of education. We must develop these faculties without allowing it to dissect the emotional life, authorizing only those thoughts whose vibrations are beneficial both to ourselves and to those around us. The heart is in need of expansion, but it is not through expansion that we become a god. Only altruism will yield the peace and joys necessary for its evolution. Finally, to answer the highest need of our nature, it is necessary to revere God, to render unto Him, in our hearts and in our thoughts, a worship that we shall adorn with every possible beauty, for love and gratitude take pleasure in their duties. In the esoteric part, initiation provides its adepts with what religion could not, without danger, confer upon its own. It is the knowledge of the mysterious forces that are around us and within ourselves. It teaches that power is limitless through will and thought. It demonstrates that all realization depends solely on these two forces, and that it can be awakened as a truly limitless power in the one who knows how to use such knowledge. Initiation further reveals to the adept that this is the vital force of which all religions speak under the name of heat. For it is neither in vain nor without cause that the idea of life is linked to that of natural heat. It is this primordial idea that has led all initiatic centers to concern themselves particularly with fire as a physical agent, considering it the representation of the vital force. And, proceeding from this premise, they have conceived of a metaphysical being that is the heart of the world, imparting to it heat and life. In ancient times, fire was worshipped as a symbol of life. Since the very first civilization, it has reigned over the altar and been paid homage as a divine image, because it represented the power of life and the flame of thought. Initiation develops new faculties in its adepts. It has created within them a more powerful intuition, as well as more vivid and certain perceptions. The field of knowledge effectively becomes more extensive through the acuity of perception. They further learn to act upon other beings. The forces they acquire through their asceticism serve them not only to ardently desire the good, but also to realize it. They possess the means to do so, because the task of man is not beyond his strength. Gatherings are, through example and union, fomenters of energies. Weakened wills are uplifted. The ailments of the spirit, like the ailments of the body, disappear through harmonious magnetism. Initiation further confers knowledge of the occult forces of which we have already spoken. These forces, which surround us and dominate the profane, can be called upon and secured as the foundation of our action. They hasten to our call when it is pure and sincere. This is a matter of the heart, free from any self-serving motive. They depend upon the rhythms to which we are subjected, and these rhythms are revealed to the adepts once they have reached the degree at which such a revelation is permitted to them. They then come to know the law of karma, the justice behind the apparent inequalities of life, and all the hidden paths of our evolution. This mysterious rhythm is revealed to us directly when our senses, having been better trained, acquire a particular sensitivity that renders them capable of such perceptions. And should the path appear arduous and difficult, all the adepts support one another, forming but a single heart and soul. They work for one another, mutually revealing the beauty of life. This active brotherhood allows the initiate to achieve full realization. In this way, he claims his place in the world. He assumes the authority necessary to work toward his own evolution and that of his environment. The initiate must work to hasten the reign of the good. This esoteric part has always been the most important. This is inherently so, because the exoteric part can provide the masses with nothing more than vague ideas, offering explanations that are insufficient to guide them along the path of realization. The masses, thus considered, must listen, act, and understand, if possible. The esoteric teaching provides all the keys, unlocks all the mysteries, acts directly upon the being, and leads it with a steady step to the core of the problem, which suddenly becomes clear. Exotericism is the theory. Esotericism is the practice. It would certainly be interesting to demonstrate the constant existence of the esoteric doctrine. Indeed, there is no lack of documents that offer proof of this certainty. But that would be a considerable undertaking, and of no immediate utility. It would require going back to distant epochs, to China, which reveals to us in the trigrams of Fohi the earliest idea of the Trinity and of its rights based upon reason, to India, the mother of all European knowledge, to Egypt, which instructed Pythagoras, to Judea, which transmitted the Kabbalah to us, to Chaldea, which bequeathed to us the sciences of observation, to Persia and to Greece, which rival each other in making the gods known to us in the most beautiful forms, forms that had never obscured the principle of all things. However, to leaf through this enormous documentation would require far more time than we have at our disposal. The present work must touch upon this historical portion rather systematically and swiftly. A single chapter is sufficient to give us a general idea, leaving it for later to return in detail to all these vanished civilizations, if time permits. What is necessary here is to demonstrate that this secret science has, throughout all ages, formed part of humanity's intellectual treasury. We will then strive to untangle it from the myths that obscure it, rendering it precise for the adepts, pure and unveiled in the hands of the workers who pursue the same goal as we do, those who seek, in the dust of ages, the secret of the clear and precise directions that will allow us to develop, within and around ourselves, all the powers necessary for their own development and for the evolution of the world. The teaching we provide in the present volume, that which we delivered in the first cycle of our initiatic center, is, above all, practical. This character of realization has forced us to exercise certain reservations. However, as we have already stated, we shall have the opportunity to revisit these, because they constitute points that cannot be developed in public, teachings that would be dangerous to entrust to the profane. These teachings are reserved for a small number of people who truly follow us, and they can only be transmitted by word of mouth. Such is not the purpose of this book, which is destined to fall into anyone's hands. As it is presented to our readers, we are certain that it already contains many teachings they would not have found elsewhere. Despite the reservation imposed upon us by prudence, we desire that whoever puts its advice into practice, not merely for a day, but to usefully modify their life, may reap the most fortunate results. One may even hope that intuition will develop within our reader, should they choose to follow the advice given, which will allow them to divine, at least in part, everything that we are not permitted to reveal here. To work, then, dear reader, this book cannot and does not seek to be anything more than the first step upon the path. Yet for whoever sets foot upon this way, an overpowering desire to travel it to the end shall arise. The initial efforts may seem arduous, but the joy is ever greater for the one who advances with an increasingly steady step, enlightened by truth, which leads to happiness along the paths of peace and goodness. Chapter 2. China. Among the most ancient civilizations, China is the one that presents us with the oldest known documents of undisputed antiquity. At any point we consider China throughout the epochs in which it is known to us, we find it in possession of a powerful civilization. Its sacred books date back to a period that is difficult to determine with complete precision, but which is undeniably extremely ancient. Such as they are, they demonstrate to us that China has, at all times, enjoyed a marvelous and refined civilization, possessing a perfect social, political, and religious organization. The most ancient sage whose memory history has transmitted to us is Henri. He is thought to have reigned in China, perhaps in the capacity of emperor, starting in the year 3468 BC. He employed all his power in spreading moral virtues among the people. It is to him or to his school that we owe the sacred book I Ching, which contains the highest and purest teachings. Despite his remote antiquity, Henri refers to other sages. He declares his desire to bequeath the works of his ancestors to posterity. He transmits these works in his book in a deliberately secret metaphysical form. Maggioi says, speaking of him, he understands that one day, for future races, his own era will be an equally abstruse past, difficult to perceive. He knew, therefore, that man voluntarily rejected what seemed to him common and everyday, and that the sages gathered these secret words with all the more care as they trained themselves to remain isolated. It is in this knowledge that Fohi veiled the truth, in fear that it might be lost. Thus it comes down to us, enriched by the commentaries of the disciples of all ages who succeeded him. As for determining, with all desirable precision, the epoch in which Fohi might have lived, we rely on Chinese historians, which is all the more difficult to verify since their way of considering time is not at all equal to ours. However, Fohi himself gives some reference of this time to determine a state of the heavens that can give us a more approximate date. This is what Maggioi expresses thus. He does not date his work from a conventional epoch or by the name of a sovereign whom time will erase from memory, but from a solar and stellar state which he describes in full detail. The work of Fohi and his school should, if we are to give credence to tradition, comprise 3 treatises, 2 of which are lost. Only the I Ching remains. It studies the modalities of creation in 64 figures forming a circle. These figures, each of which constitutes a modification of a hexagram, are made up of combinations of strokes and lines. In the eyes of the sage, these figures were but simple illustrations or points of indication from initiate to initiate. But obscurity fell upon this tradition, and it was not until much later that explanations, unfortunately brief and abstruse, accompanied these 64 hexagrams or double trigrams. One of the commentators, to whom these explanations are owed by researchers careful to absorb the instruction, was Prince Wanwang, and after him Chukong and Kongsu, whom we know better by the name of Confucius. The commentator's explanations do not shed a brilliant light upon the tradition of Fohi, which remains very obscure to the most renowned sinologists. Chantepie de la Sauce tells us, "The meaning of the whole and of the parts is entirely obscure. Attempts have been made to solve the riddle through mythology and comparative linguistics. It would be a matter, in this case, of a vocabulary to be explained through Akkadian by Lecouperie. It has also been supposed that the I Ching contains a profound meaning clothed in symbols, a philosophical cosmogony where the opposition between the masculine principle and the feminine principle dominates, between heaven and earth, between yin and yang." But Legge notes that these words are not found in the later digressions and that, even there, they do not possess the philosophical significance attributed to them. There is a preference to see in the I Ching popular morality and wordplay, sometimes witty, sometimes insipid. In any case, adds Chantepie de la Sauce, somewhat in contradiction with the preceding assertion, interesting us particularly for having shown that the I Ching was truly a hermetic work. One thing is certain. They used this book for divination, and it is to this that the I Ching owes its celebrity. The commentaries would already compare the changes of figures to the changes in nature and human destiny. We are here, therefore, proportionally, in the presence of a kind of tarot wherein the initiates declare to find traditional teachings relative to both cosmogony and philosophy, while the vulgar and those to whom they imparted some revelation considered this sacred book as a means of divination, from which they requested omens regarding private affairs. It seems that this is the first, or rather, one of the first manifestations of this duality of thought, the secret form kept in favor of a carefully chosen elite, and the exoteric thought spread to the public under a practical form that might seem coarse to the initiates, but more apt to penetrate all milieus, bringing them light inasmuch as these milieus were capable of absorbing it. What seems certain is that the foundation of the I Ching rests entirely on the observed relations of the human being with the universe. Magioi, who is an authority on the matter, notes that the Book of Rites of Zhou expresses itself thus: to make those who study it understand all the gravity of the teachings that are to follow. Before drawing the trigrams, Fohai looked at the heavens, then lowered his eyes to the earth, observed the particulars, and considered the characteristics of the human body and of all external things. One sees that herein lies the principle of occultism. It is the eternal datum of all initiations, the relationship of man and the entire universe, of that which the Hermetic tradition will later call, above all in the 16th century, the relation of the microcosm and the macrocosm. Fohai, before leaving to his disciples the tradition that he prepared for the study of prior works, now disappeared, and through his own meditations and observations, studied heaven and earth, raised his gaze to the heights, and lowered it to the depths. He studied heaven and earth, that is, as we shall see by studying the legend of the winged dragon. He studied the two principles that complete each other in an apparent antinomy, spirit and matter, and the trigrams in which he condensed his initiatory form, established the relations that he discovered. Confucius or Kongsu came long after Fohai, for he lived 5 centuries before Christ. He is, as we have said, one of the sages who most carefully commented on Fohai's I Ching. However, like his master, he was not content with a more or less learned compilation of the books of his predecessors. He took up the sacred tradition in a personal form. In Confucius, the teaching that results from these books, which still have the force of law in the Celestial Empire, is above all a moral direction. His school imitates him in this. For them, a higher will manifest itself in the perfect equilibrium of earth and heaven, in the balancing empire that unites man to the things of nature. To give thanks to the higher powers of this marvelous and beneficial equilibrium, a cult was established consisting of the worship of heaven, the worship of the Supreme Emperor, who is the creative power, and of different kinds of spirits, celestial, terrestrial, and human. These last are the forefathers of the living. The cult of the ancestors is the foundation of all Chinese religion. The fact of a daily cult, a cult that sensitizes them, implies among the Chinese of all eras a certain belief in the immortality of the soul. The ancestor, unceasingly invoked by those of his lineage, presents himself in their midst. He is consulted in all important circumstances, whatever the anxieties or ailments prevailing in the afflicted family, whether it be in the choice of a companion or husband for a young woman, or for decisions to be made of whatever order they may present themselves. Prayers are directed to the ancestors and perfumes are burned. They are beseeched for support, protection, and counsel. The living feel in their environment the very presence of their forefathers, and, to capture this good influence, on determined dates, they add to the perfumes and prayers animal sacrifices and offerings of flowers. Supplementary festivals are even held at the moment of grave events, births, and great undertakings. In addition to the cult of the ancestors, Confucius gives a moral direction to his disciples. Morality, associated with metaphysics, makes him show man closely bound to universal harmony. From this given, he concludes that human life, in its customary events, must be regulated according to the example of the sages and, above all, according to the march of the stars, the sovereign guides of nature. Naturally, it is not enough to concern oneself with the days and seasons. It is fitting that the sage develop in his being the qualities necessary for his perfection. Among these qualities, the first that he teaches is respect, and this teaching has penetrated so deeply into the public spirit that the Chinese nation became a model of the most modest and flourishing courtesy. Next comes frankness. The sage must manifest his good faith in the slightest words, putting himself on guard against the falsehood that disturbs his spirit. He must be circumspect in his expressions and, even more so, in his actions, for which he is always responsible. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.